Y'all. August 9th was not a regular birthday this year. While everybody posted the same old tributes, King Von's own mother just came out swinging. Tasha Bennett broke almost 6 years of silence and dropped the heaviest line yet. She always knew the story they sold about that night in Atlanta was bullshit. Not something felt off. Not I had questions. She said the version the streets and the blogs locked in was never the full truth, and she knew it from day one. No tears for the camera. No soft memorial caption. Just a mother looking straight at the narrative and calling it incomplete. The same people who argued for years over cameras, charges, and loyalty are now stuck. Because when the woman who put her son in the ground says the official story was wrong, every old excuse starts looking weak. Birthday just became a crime scene again. And this time the mother is the one holding the evidence. The words did not come wrapped in a long emotional speech. They came sharp and final. On the day the culture always sets aside for King Von, his mother stepped into the frame and made it clear she had never fully accepted the story that became history. According to the statements now moving through every page that covers the Chicago and Atlanta timeline, Tasha Bennett did not simply mourn out loud. She challenged the version of the night that most people stopped questioning years ago. For almost 6 years, the public narrative stayed locked. The altercation outside the Monaco hookah lounge. The physical fight. The gunfire. Lil Tim as the central figure. The charges that later disappeared. That sequence became the official memory. Fans argued over the details, but the broad outline rarely moved. Tasha's decision to speak on the birthday forced the outline back into the light. She did not deny the basic facts of the shooting. She said the full picture never matched what she felt in real time and what she continued to feel afterward. The early reaction was pure heat. Accounts that had spent years defending the accepted story suddenly had to sit with a mother's claim that the story was incomplete. Some fans treated her words as the overdue correction the culture needed. Others said grief can rewrite memory and that opening the case again only creates more pain without new proof. Both sides kept the original statement circulating because neither side could ignore the source. When the woman who buried him says the public version never sat right, the argument changes weight. What made the moment land harder was the timing. Birthdays in this culture are usually reserved for soft tributes, old clips, and long-lived posts. Turning that day into the moment a mother challenges the narrative raised the temperature immediately. People who only come online for the annual remembrance found themselves scrolling through accusations and counterclaims instead of simple memorials. The emotional contrast was deliberate and effective. The same date that usually brings the community together became the date that split it again. Old footage and old interviews began getting pulled back into the conversation within hours. Every public statement from the days after the shooting was suddenly being watched with a new filter. Clips of people describing the night, clips of family members speaking carefully, clips of the manager and others pushing back against certain claims. All of it returned with Tasha's new words sitting underneath. The gap between the calm public language of 2020 and a mother's later certainty that something was missing became the main tension of the first cycle. The claim itself stayed controlled. She did not name a long list of people or drop a full alternative timeline in the first wave. She simply made it clear that the version everyone locked in never matched what she knew and felt. That restraint kept the story from collapsing into pure speculation, while still forcing every old assumption back onto the table. In this culture, a mother speaking with quiet certainty often carries more force than a loud live full of names. By the end of the first full wave, the birthday tributes had been pushed to the side. The conversation was no longer about remembering the music or the impact. It was about whether the accepted story of the night Von died had always been missing pieces, and whether the woman closest to him had been carrying that knowledge in silence until she decided the silence was no longer acceptable. The statements are still spreading. The old arguments have been reopened with a mother's voice at the center. And the distance between the public version of that night and the version she is now describing has never looked wider. The second wave did not cool down. Once Tasha's birthday statement locked into the timeline, the entire culture started dragging every old piece of the Atlanta night back under a new and much hotter light. What began as a mother-breaking silence turned into a full reopening of wounds that most people had stopped touching years ago. People who had been close to the situation after the shooting started speaking in careful, measured tones. Nobody dropped a complete, alternate story. Several voices did admit, however, that private conversations about that night had never fully matched the clean public version the blogs and the streets eventually accepted as fact. That small admission carried heavy weight. It told everyone watching that the mother's claim was not coming from nowhere. It was landing on top of doubts that certain people had carried quietly for years and never put on the public record. The argument split hard and stayed split. One side said a mother feels the gaps that cameras, police reports, and street talk will never catch. When she finally speaks on her son's birthday, the culture has no choice but to listen. The other side said trauma rewrites memory, and that reopening the narrative this late without hard new evidence only pours salt on wounds that never healed. Both sides kept the original statements in constant rotation because neither side could dismiss the source. When the woman who put her son in the ground says the story never sat right, the usual defenses lose power fast. Old interviews and old posts from the days right after the shooting returned with fresh and aggressive captions. Every calm explanation, every defensive live, every statement that insisted the circle had done all it could now sat next to a mother's quiet certainty that something important stayed missing. The distance between the public language of loyalty in 2020 and a private knowledge that the full picture never matched became the main weapon of the second cycle. Fans who once accepted the broad outline found themselves rewatching the same clips with a completely different and much colder filter. The emotional cost rose fast and stayed high. Birthdays in this culture are supposed to be soft, old music, old photos, simple long-lived messages. Turning that date into the moment a mother challenges the accepted version of the death created a split that felt deeply personal. People who only wanted to celebrate the catalog got pulled into a heavier and uglier fight. People who always sensed the public story was incomplete felt like the long silence had finally broken in their favor. The middle ground disappeared almost overnight and has not returned. Silence from certain names became its own loud character. In this world, when a mother speaks with that level of certainty and the people who were closest to the night stay quiet, the quiet itself starts looking like an answer. Supporters of Tasha read every day without a detailed response as extra weight on her side of the scale. Others called the same silence the only intelligent move when the claim cannot be cleanly proven or killed in public. Both readings kept the story breathing and spreading. New pressure kept landing without mercy. Screenshots of older family conversations, old vague posts about the real story, and clips of people speaking carefully around the edges of the night all got stitched directly under Tasha's birthday words. None of it delivered a final smoking gun. All of it made the original claim harder to laugh off or ignore. The culture was no longer debating a random rumor from a random page. It was debating whether the mother of the man who died had been sitting on a private truth while the public version hardened into permanent history. The heat did not come from screaming. It came from the controlled way the claim was delivered and the way every old defense started looking weaker next to it. People who used to shut down any question about the night now found themselves on the defensive. People who had been called conspiracy theorists for years suddenly had a mother's voice giving their doubts new life. The shift in power was real and visible in every comment section. By the time the second full cycle peaked, the birthday tributes had been completely pushed aside and almost forgotten. The conversation was no longer about remembering the music or the impact or the legacy in any soft way. It was about whether the accepted account of the night King Von died had always been missing pieces, whether people inside the circle had carried those missing pieces in silence for years, and why the woman who buried him chose the anniversary of his birth to finally put the full weight of that silence on the public record. The statements are still moving at full speed. The old fights are wide open again. And the gap between the story the culture locked in for almost 6 years and the story a mother is now forcing back into the light keeps getting wider and hotter with every new share and every new stitch. This is no longer a birthday post. This is a mother telling the entire culture that the version they accepted was never the complete one, and the culture is still trying to decide what to do with that truth. The third wave did not bring closure. It brought a harder and more permanent fracture. Once Tasha's birthday statement had lived long enough online, the culture stopped treating it as a single emotional moment and started treating it as a permanent challenge to the story that had stood for almost 6 years. The public version of the Atlanta night was no longer safe. A mother's voice had put visible cracks in it, and those cracks refused to close. New reactions kept arriving from people who had stayed quiet for years. Some offered careful support for a mother's right to speak her truth, even if the full details stayed private. Others warned that reopening the narrative without fresh concrete evidence only created more pain for everyone still living with the loss. A smaller group tried to stay in the middle and failed. The middle ground had already been burned away in the first two waves. Every new comment pushed people further toward one side or the other. The silence from certain names continued to function as its own form of evidence. In this culture, when a mother speaks with quiet certainty on her son's birthday and the people who were closest to the night offer no detailed public response, the absence itself becomes part of the story. Supporters of Tasha read every quiet day as additional weight on her claim. Others insisted the silence was simply the only intelligent response to a statement that could not be proven or disproven cleanly in public. Both interpretations kept the original words alive and spreading. Old footage returned again with even sharper captions. Every calm explanation from 2020, every defensive post, every interview that insisted the circle had done everything possible now sat directly next to a mother's assertion that the story never felt complete. The distance between the public language of loyalty and a private knowledge that something stayed missing became impossible to ignore. Fans who once accepted the broad outline found themselves unable to watch the same clips the same way. The filter had permanently changed. The emotional cost settled into something heavier than regular internet argument. Birthdays in this culture are supposed to be about remembrance and soft celebration of the music. Turning the date into the moment a mother challenges the accepted version of her son's death created a wound that felt personal for people on every side. Those who only wanted to post old songs and keep the legacy light got pulled into a fight they did not ask for. Those who always sensed gaps in the public story felt a long-delayed validation. Neither group could fully return to the way things felt before the birthday statement. The claim itself never expanded into a full alternate timeline with names and minute-by-minute details. That restraint is what kept it dangerous. A loud lie full of accusations can be attacked and dismissed. A mother speaking with controlled certainty that the story was never right is much harder to kill. The lack of a complete new narrative forced the culture to sit with the discomfort instead of racing toward a clean resolution. By the time the third full cycle of posts, stitches, and arguments slowed, the birthday tributes had been completely erased from the center of the conversation. The discussion was no longer about remembering King Von's music or his impact in any gentle way. It was about whether the version of his death that the culture locked in for years had always been incomplete, whether people inside the circle had carried private knowledge of those missing pieces, and why the woman who buried him waited until the anniversary of his birth to put that weight on the public record. The statements are still circulating. The old defenses look weaker than they did before the birthday. And the gap between the story the culture accepted and the story a mother is forcing back into the light has not closed. It has only become more difficult to pretend the gap was never there. In the end, the birthday statement did not deliver a final verdict or a complete new timeline. It delivered a permanent question that the culture can no longer ignore. A mother who mostly stayed quiet for almost 6 years chose the day the world remembers her son to say the public story was never the full one. Everything that follows now sits under that shadow. The silence is broken. The narrative is cracked. And the people who spent years treating the accepted version as settled history are still trying to decide what it means when the mother of the man who died says she always knew better. Do you believe Tasha finally said out loud what she had been carrying since the night her son died, and that the public story was always missing pieces? Or do you think grief and time rewrote the memory, and this birthday statement only opens old wounds without delivering new truth? When a mother breaks years of silence on the exact day the culture remembers her son, does her word outweigh the version that stood for almost 6 years? Drop your honest take below. No filter. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on the post notifications. If she says more, if anyone from that night finally responds, or if new details surface, we will be right here covering every part of it. This story is far from over.